Hello, my name is Representative Christina Haswood. I represent House District 10 in the Kansas State House of Representatives. House District 10 goes southeast of Douglas County, so southeast of Lawrence, down to Baldwin City, a little bit of Wellsville, a little bit of Eudora, and I'm in my first term, so I am completing my second year. We do have 2-year terms, so I am up for re-election this year. I sit on the committees of Federal and State Affairs, Health and Human Services, Agriculture, and the Joint Committee of State and Tribal Relations. And last year, I was on Water Committee instead of Fed and State Committee, so that is just one of the new updates of this legislative session. My background is in public health, and I got in my higher education journey, I started off at Haskell Nations University, got my Associates of Science in Community Health, and that's where I really started to get the passion of Indigenous policies, and basically was the first time I actually took an Indigenous Studies class by Indigenous professors, and was just really angered at a lot of our history and really understanding how we got our sovereignty, but also what the United States government tried to get rid of us of, and all these attempts and political policy attempts at these U.S. and state levels of oppression is what I've learned in these classrooms. And these aren't really being taught in our K-12 education systems, which was also another area that really angered me as well. But I really felt a call to this area of Indigenous studies. And then healthcare was something that I always had a passion for, probably around high school, where I thought I wanted to be a nurse. And then I ended up taking anatomy and physiology during my undergrad year to get my bachelor's of science in public health. And I was having difficulty with a course of anatomy and physiology that ended up setting me back a couple times, but that was definitely a wake-up call that me being a nurse or a physician or a doctor was definitely not the right direction for me. So I started to get into the research side of things, and after Haskell I went to Arizona State University, and it was a choice for me to transfer because not only would I be closer to my family on the Navajo reservation, but also learn more about that Indigenous public health and how that works in the Southwest area, where here in Kansas that's not as developed as it could be. I also did multiple internships, from interning at Arizona Department of Health and Human Services to interning in Navajo Nation Epidemiology Center, Indian Health Services headquarters in Rockville, Maryland, to National Council of Urban Indian Health in Washington, D.C., back to Kansas City, interning for the Center for American Indian Community Health at that time. So once I really figured out that public health was something that I was extremely passionate about, I really understood it through the Indigenous model. One of my internships was on the Navajo reservation, and I got to learn the Diné logic and research model, and how public health through our lens and through our cultural perspectives and our cultural values, how that all aligns with public health. And the term holistic health is something that Indigenous peoples have been doing since the beginning of time. So seeing, this kind of being the new approach in our textbooks, it just felt like a natural fit. So after I got my bachelor's of science in public health, I then came back home to go to University of Kansas Medical Center, where I got my master's in public health. I graduated in May of 2020, then got asked to run for office April of 2020, and really made that jump. I would say maybe before graduating in that May month, to run for office, to file for office. And then in that time when I filed for office, there was already 2 other candidates, so I was in a 3-way Democratic primary for the summer of 2020, and that was interesting. It was definitely one of my first times working on a campaign, and really getting politically involved. But also, when I was in grad school at KU Med, we did learn about health and policy, and there was an assignment asking to research our state representatives, and I always had this perception that our politicians who represent us don't care about us, they're out of touch, but was pleasantly surprised when I met my predecessor at the time, Representative Eileen Horn, that she was very kind, very smart, very empathetic, and willing to learn about the issues. So I felt like we were in good hands, but when she did not seek re-election, that is when I got asked to run, and then took some thought into it, and then jumped at the opportunity. And in my campaign, it was a unique campaign. You know, I was kind of the new kid on the block, wasn't really involved in Kansas politics, did a little baby steps during the city commission race that previous year, but again, didn't really have those higher up connections for funding, for networking, for to really get a good footing in politics. So I really am so thankful for everybody who supported me, especially right at the gate when they heard about my race, and with endorsements, with how can I help, and getting me in the right direction. My campaign manager at the time is a year younger than me, so we ended up doing a lot of things together, and my treasurer was about a year or two older than me, and I was 26 at the time, so our campaign ended up having a lot of also volunteers at the high school and college level, and so that really made my campaign, all of us were under the age of 30, which is really unique in itself. And one of the things I'm most proud of, working with my TikTok manager at the time, Connor Thrash, who's currently a KU student now, a freshman, but at the time a high school senior, where we launched and worked together on my TikTok, my campaign TikTok. You can definitely check that out. That's at Haswood, FORKS, Haswood 4KS, and that's all my social media handles. And that just became something a lot bigger than I anticipated. And one of the political voter engagement, constituency engagement methods that my campaign is quite known for. So in that campaign, it was interesting to say the least, without going into too much detail, but there was definitely a lot of barriers that I faced, and my campaign manager at the time, who is a white male, was like, oh my gosh, I would never have, I've worked on so many other campaigns for men, I would have never thought that you would, get like creepy people in your DMs and, misogynistic, and the slut shaming that happened in my campaign was definitely a unique, actually not a unique thing that happens to young women, women of color, women who run in politics. So that's a little bit of my background and how I got here in that public health field. Like, we're taught how to read, research, write papers, academic posters, presenting at conferences, and I just really got tired of that routine. We do all this ground research, and I absolutely love the bread and butter of public health of connecting with people, teaching them healthy habits, doing survey implementations, focus groups, and just hearing from the community themselves of their lived experience that they are so graciously willing to share as researchers. That part I absolutely loved. But when you take all that data and it goes off to higher ups, you never really know what, your data goes towards. And I was always frustrated that the leadership who's supposed to represent me did not seem to care about the indigenous population, let alone have been on a reservation themselves. And this frustration has really came from the Congress people who have represent Congressional District 2 in the Kansas delegation, where all 4 tribes of Kansas are in Congressional District 2, along with Haskell Nations University, who is a federal entity as well. And just not having that strong voice and presence, let alone I don't think any of the Congress people have, in the past 4 or 5 years, have visited a reservation here in Kansas. So with that is really what drives me, and just the sheer fact of Native Americans weren't American United States citizens not until 1924, which is less than 100 years ago. And that in itself really angers me as being an Indigenous person, one of the first persons here. We were amongst the last to receive official United States citizenship. Anyways, so this presentation is definitely for a social workers class at KU, and a couple of things that I worked on that you all probably have researched or touched on or will be touching on in your future careers is Indigenous public health. I know I've been asked to talk about one of the bills that I co-sponsored, which was HB 2008, Missing Murdered Indigenous Peoples, what it would work with the Attorney General's office in recommending state law enforcement training on missing murdered Indigenous peoples. So if you don't know, MMIP is an epidemic in the Indigenous community that not only impacts the United States, but Canada and First Nations. And then we can also go down to the Indigenous peoples, Mexico and Latin America. But really, the lack of education of this issue seems to be just one of the barriers when we're talking to policymakers and people who work in the field who directly impact these cases. So a lot of times Indigenous women are murdered at higher rates, go missing, which we can tie to human trafficking. But also on the policy side, when this happens on tribal lands, is the jurisdiction and those types of policies where a crime happens on tribal lands, but it could be from a non-Indigenous person. Those prosecutions and pathways to justice are quite difficult then off a tribal community. So a lot of times, if you just research the topic, you could hear about 5-10 years ago where a lot of these policies weren't implemented. Just horrendous stories of our Indigenous brothers and sisters who did go missing, but family members really had to take the lead on their search parties, finding their loved ones when the FBI or local law enforcement were following a long list of protocols that was just taking way too long. In Indigenous culture too, me being Navajo, we have our certain customs towards laying folks to rest, and I'm sure other tribes have similar time frames too that are very, very culturally significant and important, and that just doesn't line up with current policies that are becoming barriers to that time length to send our loved ones back to Creator. So it's a really complex issue, and I really appreciated the term missing murdered Indigenous people. Again, this bill was created by Representative Dr. Ponkwee Victor's Cozad of Wichita. Even before I was in office, she introduced this bill and so graciously, as my mentor, invited me onto this bill, and I really got to learn the hands-on process of how bills are passed through the Kansas legislature, how to give testimony, and how to help coach other folks on how to give testimony. And it was a really great process, which is a definitely rare thing to say about other Kansas legislation. But with this bill, it was already in the works, and the legislature have seen it before. So when I was now in the legislature a year ago, I was able to help get it past the finish line. It was a really amazing moment to see in the Kansas legislature, where this bill passed out of committee, passed out of the House chamber, Senate committee, Senate chamber, with bipartisan support, unanimous support. And it really goes to show one of the main reasons why I wanted to get into politics, because I've always been told Native American issues, Indigenous issues are always bipartisan or nonpartisan because of our tribal sovereignty. And a lot of our tribal governments are nonpartisan races as well. So just to see politics being pushed aside for Indigenous issues to move forward, and my colleagues, who many of them don't have the lived experience and extensive knowledge of being an Indigenous person, got it. they saw the issue and saw the importance of it, and it was signed by the governor, and it's now been into law since July of 2021. And in the current process of after bills passed, I'm also currently learning how to keep accountability with the agencies and departments that are supposed to be implementing this law, and learning how difficult it could be. So we're still working with the Attorney General's office to get a draft of the curriculum, and then hopefully when we get that draft, we'll get community input by the tribal leaders of Kansas. But I also want to have our urban Indigenous community leaders take a look at it, just because this issue impacts, not only on tribal lands, but also everywhere else. One of the reasons that I gave that why should Kansans care about this issue is that we cannot ignore that Kansas is in the middle of the country. We have major interstate highways that go through across our state into other states, and we really need to start on this issue, educating our law enforcement, and hopefully, if I get reelected, and to hopefully work on this issue more with my colleagues, that we can really start to make the right steps and bigger steps forward. This bill is not I promise to solve everything of the issues, but just I see it as a baby step and a good step forward that Kansas is taking, and other states, my other Indigenous colleagues across the country have passed similar legislation. So it's really great that Kansas was ready to join that for our Indigenous community. But with that, again, I really appreciated the title of Missing More Indigenous Peoples, because it was quite inclusive of our trans Indigenous folks, our non-binary folks, who do have statistical data that's higher in homicide, in trafficking, in mental health crises, like all these other root causes that are in this issue of missing more Indigenous peoples. Looking at other social determinants of health like homelessness, socioeconomic issues, poverty, and trying to address these issues as much as we can, also assist our leaders across the country and the tribal community as well. This is definitely something that I see a lot of our social workers in the Indigenous community taking that step forward, because, once we have retrieved a relative safely, they're going to need help moving with that trauma, not only the trauma that they face, but, our historical trauma as well. So you guys play a really important part in this, and I hope that you learned a little bit of it today, and that I hope to continue to work on this issue in the Kansas legislature. Other social worker policies. So being on Health and Human Services, I get to see a lot of health bills and a lot of things that we're working on that I see a lot is like accreditation. And that's always a tough call, where we want to expand access to care, but at the same time, you're also diluting requirements, hours that you need to get for licensures. I think that's an important maybe heads up for the social worker community, because we are in a shortage, not only in our communities, but in our educational systems as well. And, that's just something that would be really great for social workers to have that heads up, and to get civically engaged. Things like Medicaid expansion, unfortunately, get shut down right away. It's become so political, such a political chess move, that any peep of it gets shut down. We try to implement all attempts to amend it to bills, and it just automatically does not go anywhere. But I do appreciate the passion of my chairperson in Health and Human Services Committee, where mental health is taken as a priority. We're working on a 988 bill, which passed at the federal level, and at the state level, working on the implementation of, where the funding is going to go, who's at the table for this. Hopefully we get all that set up fairly soon. One of my biggest things I was super excited for this session was acts of food sales tax. So removing or eliminating the state food sales tax. Sound like a simple thing, right? Has bipartisan support. Why is it not, moving forward in the legislature? Unfortunately, that in itself has become a political chess piece in the grand scheme of politics. It's also an election year, so people are, I feel like, more theatrical with their intentions of in the legislature. So hopefully we'll pick that right back up. We're currently on a 3-week legislative break, or legislative spring break. And this is the time where the governor is signing bills or vetoing bills. I told the previous class, before we went on break, we were in this week of conference committee week. And that is when bills get bundled. Like there'd be like 3 or 4 bills into one bill. And even like the tax bill had 29 bills into one bill, which all have not even, like, we haven't even seen those 29 bills. Like, it gets crazy. But it's also a really difficult week where, if you got like 4 bills bundled, you like 2 bills, but you don't like the other 2 bills, how are you going to vote? And that's definitely a method of each legislature. For me, I always, being born and raised in my district, I feel like I know our community values very, very well. I still live, and live, eat, and breathe the issues that we work on. And if I do have time, sometimes we have bills that we only have like an hour or 2 to vote on. I'd like to call like our local community leaders, organizational leaders, and get their opinion on an issue, but also I lean on my Douglas County delegation as well, who have more of that institutional knowledge, and who might know more information that I don't know, that how is this going to impact our community in a positive manner. So those are a couple things. I know in the last class we talked a little bit about the foster care system, the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA. For me, I believe in the state of Texas, ICWA was at a risk of being overturned, and that is a very important piece of legislation. Not only the historical context of trying to right the wrong of boarding schools, where we were forcefully removed from families to assimilate, kill the Indian, save the man. ICWA was trying to aid in that historical trauma of Native children who go to the foster care system. The courts, the judges, all do their very best that the Indigenous child goes to the same tribe, family members, so they can keep that cultural knowledge and cultural upbringing that makes them a better person, and it improves mental health. But overturning ICWA has also been proven that it can open up a Pandora's box of other Indigenous issues and question tribal sovereignty in other areas. And you can see lawyers on the opposite side who want to overturn ICWA are not in the foster care social work industry. They're in big business, big law, and a lot of money. So that already tells you off the bat that it has ill intentions, big corporate trying to profit. I think my mind already goes to casinos, tribal casinos, and to, it has a bigger agenda, which is really unfortunate because it comes at a cost of children and families in the Indigenous community. So I've been looking at research and seeing if any other states have done their own ICWA policies. In the case that ICWA does get overturned, that we would have a safety net of Kansas ICWA. This is something that's not really mainstream to my knowledge. I I really don't know of my connections of other Indigenous legislators really maybe having success with it. So this is definitely a thought that I'm going to need help on, and definitely encourage y'all to come into politics and help me, because social workers make the best politicians, in my biased opinion. That's very important legislation, especially with the Kansas foster care system just being under scrutiny, rightfully so. And we're taking steps in the legislature to try to improve that and to have these departments and offices so we don't have what was reported, a few years ago, foster children not having a home and having to sleep on the floors in the department, trying to find homes. So there's a lot of work to be done in that in the state of Kansas, I think all in the country as well. And I'm trying to think of other issues that we talked about in the last class. Other questions that were asked about me is just barriers of being a young person in politics. You could probably think of a few: imposter syndrome, things that you're going to be facing leaving, your bachelor's program or your master's program. Again, I just graduated grad school about 2 years ago, and really did not have that extensive knowledge of being in the field and learning, all I've learned in the classroom. But I'm so lucky to have the support of my colleagues, the support of my community leaders, organizations, and committee. It's basically like a college schedule, and we literally have CEOs, lobbyists, directors, like people that you probably see as special guests like myself, experts in the field come to our community committee and educate us on these issues. So it's I'm always learning every day. I shared how learning how to stick up for myself has been an ongoing challenge, right? Being a woman, we're told that we're too emotional, we're too soft for politics. Oh, you're just gonna cry at every little thing. It's a delicate balance of learning, in a workspace, right, that I work with a lot of men who don't look like me, and trying to work through that, trying to break those glass barriers, but also, even in my campaign, one of the tactics used against me was that I was too young and inexperienced to do this job. Just people that always doubt you, and I think that's just politics in general. People are going to continue to doubt you, so you have to come out and prove to them that you can do this job and you can do it better than they've ever expected, and to really earn your spot and to earn your credibility in this world, or in the world of politics. That was a little deep. I would say also being a woman too, like there was comments in the media of the Kansas legislature of a legislator who was laughing at mocking the gender pay gap, and made a comment under his breath that men statistically work harder, so that's why they earn more than women, or something not thoughtful. Obviously they didn't think that through. And we still face it today. That was literally 3 weeks ago in the legislature. All this is still happening. Me being as an Indigenous woman, Indigenous person in the Capitol, I've had comments towards me, towards my other Native American colleagues, and you can definitely Google this too. There was a comment of, you shouldn't be scared to die of tornadoes in Kansas. You should be scared to die of Indians scalping you or something like that. Another comment was made a month ago of making sure that we didn't have a tomahawk. Just these things that still happen today, that obviously we have a lot more work to do, but now that we're in these positions of power, we can hold accountability, and we can bring light to the situation and just say, enough's enough. This does not fly. And that really needs to change. even either with the person themselves or with you at the ballot box. So I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak to your class. This was a little bit long, but I hope I provided you with enough knowledge and insight. And if you ever have the slightest thought about thinking of running for office, please do. My colleagues currently in the House, Representative Susan Ruiz, Representative Heather Meyer, are social workers themselves, and do that delicate, weird balance of still have to hold a job, but also a legislature. And they work with me on the Committee of Health and Human Services, and they have this insight of knowledge that none of us have, right? And they think differently, and they have really great questions that we would not have known because we have not walked in the shoes of a social worker. So please run for office. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. You can also run for your local offices as well, school board, municipalities, just getting involved and civically engaged and raising issues, uplifting not only your voice but other voices as well on these important issues. There's probably a list of other issues that I did not have time to get towards or go more into depth. But also I think another great part that you can play in the Kansas legislature is educating us on issues that are happening in your community, that you see in clinical practice or in your internships, during the time early in the legislature and committee time. You can provide testimony, is always welcome to the public. If you ever need help on accessing these issues, please do not hesitate to reach out to me in my office. You can always email me at christina.haswood@house.ks.gov. Again, reach me on any of my social media platforms. I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Haswood, HASWOODFORKS. And feel free to slide in my DMs. Follow me or comment. I'm always down for coffee too and lunch. Any way that I can help, any way I can get more educated on issues, will not only help me as a legislator, but you can also help raise voices and shed light on issues that often might not be heard of. All right, well, thank you so much, and take care. Stay safe. Bye.